bled your mom from Meekland Ave. Reach your for just meeting half. Hands tied against the odds. How the hell you even that? People from the slums once, now live in the humdrum. Mama from the bar used to be dreaming we could start once, mama. I know it's gonna be fine wherever we go, cause we know the race is all a dream to be a hero. With an ego to an equal, I free flow when I speak though. My pipe dreams through a peephole, my skin so Filipino. Oftentimes my pride inside is fighting high tides. The day we broke the ocean was the day you learned to know stop. Closed eyes, fingerprint inks with the most die. Those times mama never blinks, hit the old twice. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it here. 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 But some freestyle to me, I've been doing this since 6-year-old. Thinking on my own 2 feet, survival, pick and go, pick a roll. You can be the swimmer or a second soul. I was the 6-year-old that I had a father. Think you roll a silver spoon to dinner roll. So will you fold or will you go? Pretend to sing like Figaro. My people still invisible. When you the spitting image of a person that you hate. Make sense, I'm spitting images of dawn that never breaks. Nirvana never wakes, so is upon a bitter fate. The spawn from inner hate, I never wanted to be great. I study my mother, wonder how she holds his family. That minimum salary stress, as much as it can be. Stress but keeps the shit from me. I'm just trying to fit and see a grave with that acceptance that can validate my sanity. I wrestle with affirmations, settle for massive faces. After all, it's so the man to always treat our places. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it here. 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 At school, reduced lunches for my mama still for lunchtime. 9 to 5 minimum wage. She got the bus line. Here I am, filling the page, waiting the rush rhymes. Still I'm during the day. I'm getting cosign. Still rolls, some punchlines. The payrolls, some crunch time. Take shows like crunch time. Grade those like front line. Like long, these nice girls, we never had lifelines. So these days, I'm scared of what might go through my mind. Flow like Rizal and I'm rotten like Hagedorn. Mixed with thorn. My follow no watches the page mourns. Say my name and say scorn. Time to make your face form in ways you never made. Born from another place. Thorns couldn't break away. Your rhyme ain't just a breakaway from being center stage from off the page. Will I fade away? Never been the type to say. Scared of what I have to face. All I ever knew was being me. So all I ever need to say is I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it there someday. I said, mama, we gon' make it here. I said.
Good afternoon and welcome on behalf of the Warrior Cross Cultural Center and the Ethnic Studies program. We want to welcome you this evening. My name is Carolina Alfaro and I'm the director for the Warrior Cross Cultural Center here at Stan State. We're so excited that you're able to join us in this virtual space tonight. Before we begin this event, I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge that Stan State would like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this territory here in the Northern Central Valley. We'd like to honor the Yokuts peoples and all the indigenous peoples that came before us to protect and to just care for all of our lands here in the Central Valley. Our campus, Stanislaus, is named after a warrior chief, Estanislao, and it is after him that our campus just really is now reconnecting to those roots, trying to understand, who he was and how important the legacy that not only Estanislao, but all the peoples in the Yokut Natotomy tribes and other tribes surrounding the area have really been instrumental to these ancestral grounds. And so we celebrate the resilience and the strength of the people that came before us. We also want to acknowledge that it is AAPI Heritage Month. And so we want to take a moment to just invite all of you to continue to honor the lives, those past and present, who have contributed to fight for social justice and social change in our communities. And so tonight is a great way to do that. Tonight's panel discussion is titled Anti-Asian American Racism and Xenophobia. We are centering American Pacific Islander experiences before and during the pandemic. Asian American, and other racialized populations increasingly experience racism, hostility, and violence during the COVID-19 global pandemic. And we've all been witnesses to witnessing it either through media, through in person, or through word of mouth that we've heard. And so I'd like to introduce now Dr. Samuel Bañales from the Ethnic Studies program, who will introduce our panelists this evening. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Dr. Samuel Bañales, Director of Ethnic Studies and Associate Professor. Welcome to this event. I just want to provide a few remarks in terms of the framing and also introduce some folks. So regarding this event, for folks who don't know, the field of Asian American Studies is part of Ethnic Studies. Ethnic Studies emerges in 1968 and 1969 in the San Francisco Bay Area after a prolonged student strike that was done in collaboration with faculty and staff. At the time, it was the longest student strike in the history of this country. So if it wasn't for students in solidarity with faculty and community members, we wouldn't have had this field, and we wouldn't even have had a space in the university to be able to discuss these issues critically. So Ethnic Studies emerges from collaboration between Black students, Chicano, Latino students, Asian American students, and Native American students, hence the field of Ethnic Studies. So it's a privilege and an honor to be able to have a space in the university that came from demands from students and community and faculty working together in solidarity. And so here we are in 2021, 50 years later, 50 plus years later, with issues that were prevalent at that time in the 1960s, including racism, colonialism, imperialism, and et cetera. And this event is actually was already being organized prior to the anti-Asian violence that we saw in Georgia and across the country. So it just speaks to the fact that these issues matter before we get to the point in which there's now more attention and awareness around the ways in which racism manifests currently. And so I want to point out, though, that, like, for example, with us, we currently don't have an Asian American Studies faculty, but we have hired a faculty member that will be joining our team, and I'll introduce them pretty soon. But did that mean that we don't have the event, right? And I think this is a responsibility that we all have, to know how to work in solidarity and to create spaces. Doesn't mean that you necessarily are part of that community, but you can still create a space in which that community can come together and still make an intervention. So it's a call also for all of us here, that even if you're not Asian American, that it doesn't mean that you just let this violence and racism continue and be a bystander. On the contrary, you could still work in solidarity with these communities. And I think historically we have models of folks who have done this. For example, Yuri Kochiyama, a Japanese American activist who worked in solidarity with the Black community, right? So it's a call for us to also to figure out the ways in which we can also intervene when there's racism and violence affecting any community, right? So it's a privilege to be able to be in this space together. And also it's about framing. I think oftentimes, and I'm sure folks will probably talk about this model minority stereotype that often Asian American populations, gets tagged under the stereotype that, oh, they're the good minority. They don't experience racism in the same way as other marginalized groups. And that's a misnomer and actually part of white supremacy, the ways in which this works. So I think this event is also not only talking about racism, but really calling to attention the ways in which white supremacy works and racializes multiple marginalized populations. And so I'm excited about this event. We need to understand that it isn't only racism happening with the violence that we experienced recently, but it actually has a much longer trajectory. I mean, this country has racism as part of its foundation, and not only this country, but the Americas and the Western, imperialist world. So I think we have to start thinking about it in this way as we move forward and try to find ways to transcend this violence and work towards healing and effective social change. So I'm very excited, and I'm going to, I don't know, Chia, are you connected? Before I introduce you, I want to make sure you're here. Yes, you are. Okay, so it's my honor to introduce to our community here the faculty that we have hired that will be an ethnic studies professor, but also particularly focusing on Asian American and Pacific Islander studies. Dr. Chia Jiang just completed a dissertation recently from UC Merced titled A Cycle of Violence, Hmong Refugees, Household Decisions, Economic Transnationalism, and Identities. So please help me welcome our incoming faculty, Chia Jiang, and please, if you, virtual claps or unmute yourself or, thumbs up or the party sign or, in the chat room, you could also share just any notes you want to say. And then Chia, I definitely want you to unmute yourself and say a few words if you choose to, just to introduce yourself to the community. That'd be great.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Chia Zong, as Samuel has mentioned. I do a lot of research in immigration, sense of belonging, and so obviously my work fits in the Asian American community, but also Southeast Asian, and specifically I work with the Hmong community. I'm really, really excited to be in this space with you all. So I am so thankful that Samuel has invited me to be in this space, and I look forward to having conversations with you all, getting to know you all, as well as, just having this space as a healing space, as well as one of empowerment. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you. And we look forward to for you to join our team, and also, the next, the next API month, it'll be, exciting to just continue this kind of, radical, decolonial, intersectional, critical programming that our program does. So welcome. We're very happy to have you join our team. Great, thanks. The next person I want to introduce will be, I don't know what title you'd like for me to give you, Dr. Nakano. MC, I don't know, host, moderator, everything. Dr. Nakano is an associate professor of sociology at CSU Stanislaus. They completed a master's degree in Asian American Studies from San Francisco State University and a PhD in sociology from the University of California at Irvine. And Dr. Nakano has an ethnic studies heart and has worked with the ethnic studies program in solidarity in so many ways, particularly this year with the implementation of ethnic studies, AB 1460. Think about it, like 50 years ago, and folks like, Dr. Trinity Ordona, who are on this panel, who actually were part of, this struggle of creating ethnic studies, right, or benefiting from it back in the 60s and 70s. And here we are 50 years later, finally we have a requirement. So, it's a concrete way in which we can intervene with the racism, the structural, white supremacy that we have. And so Dr. Nakano has been very instrumental to that, even though, he is in sociology. But again, he has an ethnic studies heart. And so I just want to thank you for being here. And also, I just think if you want to say a few words about, some of the problems that we have in our universities, such as having very few people representing these communities, right? And so when these issues happen of like violence or racism, we're called upon to be in like 50 different spaces. But are there really structural changes happening in terms of diversifying the faculty, the ways in which, it should happen, right? So I just know particularly you've been stretched thin, Dr. Nakano, post, the violence happening in Georgia. So it really means a lot that you're here, and we're very excited to have you. So everybody, please help me welcome Dr. Nakano. Virtual claps, snaps, party, chat box, everything. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Banyalas. Thank you all. I'm so excited. I'm excited to have Dr. Xiang join us. I'm super excited to have her joining our campus in the fall. I think we are long overdue for a Hmong American Studies scholar specifically, and Asian American Studies scholar more broadly on our campus, given our demographics and where we're situated. So I'm really excited to have her join us. So I guess, I'm just here to introduce each of the speakers. So what I'll do here is maybe I'll just introduce you each by name to start us off, just so at least we know who will be speaking. And then I'll go into the more extended bio as I introduce each of you individually right before you speak, if that sounds okay to everybody. Our first speaker will be Trexie Ching, who's joining us all the way from New York. Our second speaker will be a familiar face, Sang Vang. Our third speaker will be Dr. Winnie Tam Hung. And then our final speaker will be Dr. Reverend Trinity Ordona. So to start us off will be Trixie Ching. Trixie was born in Taiwan and came to the United States at the age of 3. She graduated from Columbia University with a bachelor's in political science. Prior, she worked in a variety of social justice organizations, including School of Unity and Liberation, otherwise known as SOUL, Upward Bound, and Project Survive of City College of San Francisco. She is a stroke survivor and currently resides in New York City as a consultant for various organizations such as Resilience 2032. Please join me in welcoming Trexie Ching.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so let's see. So just to start out, my past. So I was born in Taiwan and my parents decided to immigrate to the US when I was 3.5. The thing is, when they say immigrate, they loosely mean it because we just came here without citizenship. So I was without papers for 34 years. So at 34, I finally got my citizenship. So yay, I guess. And then so we moved a lot in the time that we were here. We moved significantly when I was a child, when I was younger. And the reason why we moved, what my mother says, is because of work, because they had different kinds of work. But the thing is, they weren't in the military. It wasn't anything like that. It was, they just had like regular.
Trixie, I believe we lost your audio, unless it's just me.
Yeah, Trexie, we can't hear you. Your audio. Trexie.
State to state.
She might not hear us.
There was your audio went away for a bit.
Okay.
You were just about to talk after we mentioned that your family wasn't moving because of the military, and then your audio disappeared. So if you can kind of go back and start from that point.
Okay. Can everybody hear me right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So we weren't in the military. They just worked in restaurants, really. But the thing was that we were undocumented. So it was very hard to find a job that can basically make us go forward. And so we moved a lot of different places. We moved from New York to Indiana, from Indiana to Florida, all these different places. Let me see, the second slide. Can we move to it? So, okay. Let's see. So I moved from Taiwan. So I just did this like offhand, like very, I just took out like papers and I did it really quickly because like, I was looking online and I couldn't find like one that was just like the different states that I had. And then I put Taiwan there. So because I moved from Taiwan and I went to New York first, and that's the place I'm currently living at. And then from there, we went to Indiana, and then we went back to New York, and then we went to Florida, Pennsylvania is at the end, and then Texas, Colorado, Georgia, all these different places I have lived before. And it's interesting because every place there was some kind of racism or xenophobia. So like when we came to New York, it was it was it was okay, but then when we moved to Indiana, we lived in a very small area. So it was called Newcastle. So if you could transfer to the third um, one. So, okay. And so like every day when I would go to school, I would hear like some racist remarks like, oh, you're Chinese, and oh, Chinese people, their eyes are very small, and that, you know, and then also we would I would go back, like, because we owned a restaurant there, and my parents would pick me up and, you know, from school and take me back to like the workplace. But then apparently there was also KKK there, because in Indiana, I think it is the headquarters of the KKK. And but I was, I think I was about 8 then, 8, 7, 8. So I didn't understand. Like my parents had told me before about the KKK, and I just didn't understand what it meant. And they were on the street basically. But they were wearing like different colors. It wasn't. They weren't wearing like white. It was like the Grand Master and all these different kinds of people, right? And I was like, and my uncle had picked me up, and I was like, oh, why are those people out? I was like, it's not Halloween. And he was like, don't look at them. And I was like, why can't I look at them? And he was like, don't look at them. I was like, why? And he's like, because they don't like us. And I was like, what do you mean they don't like us? I was like, I'm a kid. I'm like a young child. And he was like, no, they don't like us. And I was like, I don't understand. And he was like, they don't like us because we're Chinese. I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like it just like it boggled my mind. And then later on, like a few years had passed, and then I finally understood what that actually meant. And actually that day when they were out, because it was only my parents, they only had it was like only their restaurant, and then everybody else's restaurant there was like white. So then the only person that was Black went into our restaurant then, and then somebody that was Jewish went into our restaurant then, because they were worried about the KKK because they were basically taking over the town. And then let's see. So I'm gonna just talk about the places that really stand out in my mind. So Indiana really stands out in my mind because the KKK, and then just everybody like that was there was there was a lot of racism there. And then if we go to the fourth slide that I have, so Florida, Miami, you would think that it wasn't racist because Miami is known as being of color, basically. It's mostly people from Cuba and, you know, other places like that. But interesting enough, because later on when I was older and I went to Mexico, and I told them, I was like, oh, I used to live in Miami. And they were like, oh, they're like, there's lots of Cubans there, right? I was like, oh yeah, there's lots of Cubans. And the woman that was talking to me about it, she had gone to Cuba for a bit. And she was like, oh, they're such beautiful brown men, da da da. And I was like, no, they're not. I was like, they're white men. But then I realized that it's because it's all the whites that left when when the country got taken over. So they left to escape, and they went to Miami. And their mindset is very, very old school white, very, very, very racist. And I experienced some very like open racism there. So I went to two different schools. So I went to a public school there, which is Ruben Dario. That's the one that I have, the picture that I have. And it was okay, but there was racism, like people call me names and stuff. But, I didn't really pay attention to it. I was like, whatever. But then later on, my mom sent me to a private school, which is the other picture. It's Immaculate Conception. And it was only one class per grade. And I was in 7th and 8th grade there. And people were very, very racist, really, really, really racist. It was weird because everybody was in 7th grade, but they acted as if they were in 5th grade or something. So everyone acted a lot younger than they were because I think they had been in a school with only one class per grade. So they didn't realize that they were acting really, really young actually. But young in a really negative way, in a very racist way. And I was called a lot of names just like before, but I was also pulled up in front of class because of my race too. And it was just really weird because there was another guy that went to the school that was like half Asian, but we were both not trying to be friends because everybody wanted us to be friends, and we're like, we're not trying to be friends because just because you're Asian doesn't mean that I'm your friend, and then let's see. So the fifth slide, if you could go to that. So then the personal of Florida is that my parents had opened a restaurant, and random people would leave racist messages, like really, really very racist messages. And there were some times that that I picked up the phone and I got so angry at these people that I yelled back at them too. And but they were like, they're significantly older people that were calling and leaving these racist ass messages. And I got mad and I yelled back, but it doesn't do anything. And then sometimes there would be so we'd always clean on the outside because there were lots of like seats that we left on the outside because it's Florida, it's got nice weather and stuff. So we'd clean outside, and every morning, some mornings we go and there would be a racist message left by some person that some whatever person. And the thing is, it was all mainly like Latino folks, but it was like white Latino folks, and they didn't like basically anybody else other than themselves, but themselves and white people because they thought they were white basically. And then let's see. So the sixth page. So then I moved to in some point I moved to Marietta, Georgia. And the first school that I went to when I was there was called Chattanooga High School. And it's funny because I had, so in Florida, I was in middle school. And when I started high school, I had moved to San Francisco at that time. And I actually had a very good time there. But then halfway through ninth grade, we moved to Georgia, which was not a good idea. Not a good idea on my part. I don't think it was a good idea, but for my parents, it was a good idea. And the teacher of Chattanooga High School was like, "Oh, where did you move from?" And I was like, "Oh, I just came from San Francisco." She's like, "Oh," "You're not gonna like it here." And that's the very first place that anybody has told me that I would not like it there. Every other place that I moved to, people would be like, "Oh, you're gonna love it here. It's great." It's the only place, like, not only her, but like a bunch of other like teachers like told me, "Oh, you're not gonna like it here." So yeah, but anyways, the second high school that I went to was George Walton High School, and that's the longest one that I was there at. I was there for about 3 years. And the first guy that I dated when I was there, um, it's interesting because like he was part Cuban also, like his dad was Cuban, his mom was white, but they were very, very racist. They're very racist, so I never got introduced to his family. And he would have some like racist notions too. Like sometimes he would say that that our vaginas were crooked because we were Chinese. I was like, excuse me, it's not crooked. It's just like these really racist little things that he would say all the time. I was just like, and I didn't know that I can say, forget you. I don't want to date you anymore, because I felt like I needed to be this basically good person that just dated whoever wanted to be with me. It was weird because I went through this time in my life that where I was like, oh, I want to be white. It was really bad actually. I wanted to be white, and I wanted to be this blonde haired girl and stuff. But then like in roughly about middle school, I just got over it. I was like, fuck this. Why do I want to be white? I don't want to be white. I love being Chinese. And I was looking up like different kinds of things like online and stuff, and finding like things about like Asian Americans and stuff like that. And it really helped me a lot. And then let's see.
Sound came out again. Can't hear you.
There are these group of guys, and they
So
were
we lost you the last maybe minute or two. So if you could just start again from the New York slide.
okay. Can you hear me again? Can you
Now,
hear me?
yes.
Yes? Okay. So so I was on the subway, right? And it was late at night. It was about 1 o'clock at night. And there was like a group of guys there. It was a huge number of guys. And I was just, sitting there. And one of them started calling me a chink. And he kept calling me a chink for the longest time. Like he just said over and over and over again. And I was on the subway though, so I couldn't really like move or go anywhere. And I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna sit out. I'm just gonna sit here. I'm gonna fucking wait. And but then he was hitting on me, but then calling me a chink. And then his friend would call me a chink too. It was just very weird because it was like partially like hitting on me and then partially like insulting me. It's just like very weird because I feel like a lot of times as a woman too, I get a lot of insulting me and then hitting on me at the same time. And it's very, very strange. But both of these things happen simultaneously. And it's very, very weird too. And then there was like a group of women. This was on the subway too. And they were sitting there, and it was basically empty too this time. And I was sitting there though, and it's obvious that I'm Asian. And this woman was talking about Asians, and she was like, "Oh, I hate them. Oh, look at them, and they dress this way, and they talk this way, and they do things this way." I was like, dude, like I'm Asian sitting here, and I completely understand you, and you're sitting here talking all this stuff about how much you hated us. and then at work, just so I worked at Credit Suisse for a while, and a lot of times like certain things would happen that they would say no to me. Like it was always like no when I wanted to get something done, but then they would always say yes to this other girl who wanted to get it done. This other girl was white, but to me, and it was exactly the same thing.
So we lost you again with the sound.
Everybody else, like they're white, they're black, they're Latino, they get higher up. And it was just very strange because it was as if basically anti-hate was going on. No, anti-Asian hate was going on. And then so yeah, so let's see. Um so anti-Asian crimes like in New York City right now, so it's increased to nearly 150% in 2020. And, many of the cases are not charged as hate crimes because there's this thing that they are making us have to go to them and complain about the crimes that have happened because it's very obvious that they're hate crimes, but then they don't charge these people as hate crimes. It's like Atlanta, how it's a hate crime, but then they don't charge them as hate crimes. And people are so upset about this because if they charge them as hate crimes, it's much easier to like for them to go to jail basically. And in Queens, like just recently there was this woman that was walking and this guy like was like Chinese virus and then spat on her kid. It's just a lot of crazy stuff that is going on. So yeah. And then the next slide that I have. So for the future, basically, it's not even the future. It's like now in continuation with later on. So you could get involved with your local organization. So like in New York, there's Asian Society, Asian American Arts Alliance, Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, Asian Youth Center. There's all these places that you can get involved with and feel like you're with people that also know what is going on with your experience because they experience it too. And then you could also get involved with social media. Like there's this guy that got involved with Twitter and made this huge thing, like because it was I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically he used Twitter to enhance like the calls for assistance, and then you could take Asian American Studies courses because like when even though I knew that like all the things that were happening were wrong, I didn't fully understand what it really meant in our society. And then I took a lot of Asian American Studies courses, and it blew my mind. It like totally opened my mind up to what all of it actually means, like systemically and interpersonally, like
Your sound went away, but I think you were concluding. Do you mind just saying the last sentence or two? Yeah, so we lost your sound, Trexie, the last sentence or two that you said. So yeah.
So did you guys hear about the ethnic studies courses that I talked about?
Yeah, you mentioned how it transformed you, and then I think you said like a few sentences, and then we didn't hear the last, your concluding thoughts, I guess. So I don't know if you.
Okay, so Asian American Studies, ethnic studies courses, they helped me so much. I understood that this was systemic, that it was interpersonal, that it's actually personal also. And it's just very important to like take ethnic studies courses if they are available to you or if you have access to them. And yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Trexie. Definitely a great way to kind of kick us off, touching on a lot of the topics I think that are sort of circulating right now, and certainly circulating in a lot of the students' ethnic studies classrooms right now as well. Our next speaker is Sang Vang. Sang is a lecturer in the ethnic studies program here at Stan State and is also a lecturer in the merit writing program at UC Merced. His areas of interest include racial and ethnic history, immigration laws and policy, and media representation. Vang has worked the last 3 years on several projects to preserve refugee community history and document 40 years of Hmong in America. He lives in Fresno and grew up right here in the Central Valley of California. Please all welcome Sang Vang.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. And so I could speak a little bit about some of my early experience, growing up as a refugee, growing up as a Hmong American. And so I was born in a Thailand refugee camp. So I came to the United States when I was 1. And like many refugees at the time, when we were sponsored to come to the United States, we were sponsored by Christian white families. And so in some ways, they were nice people with us. They're really nice to us, but they didn't speak our language. They didn't really know much about who we were, right? They took us in for a few months. And so, my parents, they flew from Thailand to upstate New York, right? And in the dead of winter, and they never seen snow before, right? So we were hosted by a white family and surrounded by whiteness with the snow and everything. And so my parents, it took a lot. They were in like culture shock. They weren't able to speak to our sponsors. They were traumatized by the war, seeing family members die, fleeing the country of Laos during the secret war of Laos. And so, they, like many refugees at the time, what they needed most was to be near family, to find family, right? But unfortunately, the United States didn't take that into consideration at the time, because when the United States, finally agreed to take in refugees, they decided to scatter all the refugees to across the country, to more than 3 dozen states, right? So my family was, we were scattered to upstate New York, and we only stayed with it for a few months because the isolation, and again, like just having some sort of support. So my family decided to move to the Midwest, to the Twin Cities. That's why I grew up for early part of my life. And so we went to St. Paul, Minneapolis area, right? So today that location, the Twin Cities, it has a large Hmong American community. And also, as you know, like over the last year with the George Floyd killing by Officer Chauvin, the Hmong American community has been put on a spotlight, right, for both good and bad. His Officer Chauvin's partner was a Hmong American police officer, right, and his wife, his ex-wife, was also a Hmong American woman, right? And so all these tensions were highlighted in local and national media about who were the Hmong, who were these Hmong Americans, right? And I got a lot of media requests to talk about who Hmong Americans were, because a lot of times, like when something happens in ethnic minority communities, you bear some responsibility to talk about it, right? Because the media, they want to know, they ask, and so I get asked a lot by the media, asking to see how Hmong Americans feel about something, right? Like in this case with the what happened with George Floyd, and so I grew up in Minneapolis for a short period of time, and then my family decided to move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And and at the time in the 1990s, like Wisconsin was one of the most racially segregated school systems in K to 12 at the time. We think about Brown versus Board education in 1954, right? So 40 years later, Wisconsin is still very, very segregated. And so my first primary grades, I went to schools in the inner city, which was predominantly Hmong and Black students. And then the state decided to bus students to desegregate some of these schools, right? And so my family, although my parents didn't really speak English and know the system, they heard from relatives that if we went to school in the suburbs, we would get better education, right? So although they didn't really fully understand the system, they knew that if they sent their children to the suburbs, bus them to predominantly white schools, then they may get better education. But then they didn't understand that going to predominantly white schools, then you would experience like racism. And you being like one of two Hmong families at an elementary school, you really stood out. Like when we were bused to go to the school in the suburbs, there was two Hmong families and one Black family, and everyone else was predominantly white in the suburb, right? And so it's very, very different kind of education. Like things like going ice skating for PE. Like we never did that in the inner city. We never went to camp in the inner city. But now that I was in this program to go to school in the suburbs, I started doing these kind of things, and my parents didn't understand or didn't know why, right? And so I did it for a few years, and then when I was about to go to a middle school, one day my parents decided that, we're gonna pick up and move to Stockton, California, right? And so like a few days later, two uncles that my father haven't seen in about 10 years, they show up, and then they help drive us from Milwaukee to Stockton, California, right? And so I came to Stockton, which is a very different racially, culturally, really a different city, and also a different school system, right? So I went to my middle school there, and I went to high school there for a few years. And then at the time, what was happening in the late 1990s was that there was, like the last waves of refugees that were arriving to the Central Valley, California, places like Stockton, Merced, Fresno. They were bringing in the very last waves of refugees that didn't come to the United States yet, right? And so during that time, there was also a rise in like gang and youth violence in Stockton schools as well. My family lived on the south side of town, and so because of these reasons, my parents were very fearful of not just like like the ethnic Hmong gangs, but other Asian, other gangs. They're really scared of that, and so they decided to move to Turlock. Out of all the places, they just pick a place, and then like, oh, we're gonna move to Turlock during our Christmas break of my second year of high school. They decided that, oh, we're gonna move to Turlock, and I'm like, why are we gonna go to Turlock? We don't know anyone there, right? And so my dad, along with like 6 other uncles, we decided to move to Turlock, and we actually lived next to Stanislaus State. And so in a way, like it was like the only school that I applied to when I was in high school in Turlock. And so I applied to school to go to Stanislaus, and so I mean, it's very just different being all these different places, moving a lot. I think before I came to Stanislaus, I was never in a place or in the school setting for more than 2 or 3 years. And I ended up being like at Stanislaus as an undergrad for 4 years. And then, being a lecturer back here for the last like 7 years, like it's like the longest place I've been was that being at this campus, right? And so in a lot of ways, like, Stanislaus always feels like home to me because I was here as a student, as an alumni, and then I'm teaching here for the last few years. And I think that, like for me, I didn't really understand, or I didn't get to learn about who I am, right? Or I didn't, when in K-12, there's very little about people of color, about the contributions and the history of of Asian Americans in the United States. So I didn't really see any of that. And so similar to like Tracy said, growing up, like I was kind of ashamed of who I am. I identify, wanted to be accepted, wanted to belong, right? And so a lot of time, growing up, I see this today with like some of the Hmong youth as well, that they would claim like a fantasy heritage. They would claim a more well-known Asian American group because, when they think about or hear about who Hmong Americans are, it tends to be negative. It tends to be bad things that happen on the news. And so a lot of times, like when I speak to some of these youth, they can't find anything to be proud of their own identity and about who they are, right? And so I grew up like that as well in the 80s, 90s, like not seeing anything positive about my own community. And a lot of that didn't change until I came to Stanislaus when I got the chance to take Asian American study classes, and being in ethnic studies classes, right? That really allowed me to see that a lot of this has been missing in history for me. Like I didn't get to learn about this in K-12, right? And so I asked questions, like why wasn't I taught this before? Why do I have to wait to come to college? Because so many young men like me even make it to college, right? And I mean, I have a lot of cousins that never finished high school. Some of them got in trouble. Some of them very young, like in middle school, high school. And so during the time, the 80s, 90s, it was very common for Hmong Americans to marry very young in high school. And so I going to college at the time was very different from what many young Hmong men would do. And again, like I think that being in ethnic study classes really allowed me to understand myself better, to learn about my history, and again, to think about, to process why my family moved around so much because of poverty, because my parents couldn't speak English and things like that. And so being in these kind of space allowed me to really understand myself better, and that's what motivated me to go to grad school to study ethnic studies as well, right? And so that's a little part about my K-12, and I think that for me, being at Stanislaus, although at first it was kind of by accident, and it turns out that it wasn't by accident being here, because I had that one-on-one support with a lot of faculty on campus at the time, and for me, it wasn't until my third year of college that I finally had like professors and teachers that I connected with, that they knew how to motivate me and help me focus on my academics. Because before that, I never really had that, right? And so I went from like a C student my early years of college to becoming a straight A student, and then being able to go to get accepted into a PhD program, right? Which I didn't think I would be able to do all these kind of things. So that's a little bit about my early education experience. I think that a lot of things that I learned, like in the classroom, like from students over the last year, right, or teaching Asian American study classes, that even like a lot of students of color or Asian American students, they don't know their own history. They haven't learned it, right? And so a lot of things that when you teach them what has happened, a lot of times they question things like that. Like for example, like many Asian American students don't know who Vincent Chin is, right? They don't know that in like in California, Chinese and other Asian immigrants, they couldn't testify against white people, right? Like other people of color. And then of course, like the Chinese Exclusion Act, things like that. So before and after the pandemic, I think that there will be continue to be these things that affect Asian Americans, right? I mean, over the last year, Asian Americans have experienced two pandemics, right? One, the COVID-19, and second is like the racism, anti-Asian pandemic that has affected Asian Americans. And so I think that like we continue to do this work to educate students, to help them to help open their eyes to see, right, what they haven't been taught before. And so I think that that's very important work that we do. And then I think that the other thing I was going to talk about a little bit was just in terms of like the last year, when I mentioned that Asian American has experienced 2 pandemics, is that, you know, in terms of tracking the hate crimes, the incidents that affected Asian Americans, right? So some of you know, like the Stop Anti-Asian Hate website that has like documented over the last year about 4,000 cases, right? So having this number, I think is important, but we also know that, like, you know, like many Asian Americans are not likely to report things that happen to them, right? So the number that is actually much higher than the 4,000 or so that has been documented last year in terms of you know, Asian Americans across the country experiencing hate crime and other violent incidents. So we know that number is much higher than what's been documented. And then I think that when I was looking at some of the data that they reported, is that there, you know, Asian women are more likely to report these kind of cases 2 times more than Asian men who aren't likely to report these kind of cases, right? And so we're seeing this happen across the country. And so I think that, you know, having this data is very important to document and to ask decision makers in terms of what they can do in terms of policy or laws to bring change, right? Because we've seen, like, over the last year with the, you know, like how the virus has been racialized in terms of the political rhetoric used, right, by people in power, by calling it the Kung flu, the China virus, right? So in a way, like, the virus has been racialized in this way, and so we're seeing the after effect of it, and I think at the same time too, like, you know, what the media tends to do is, like, you know, they tend to focus on these incidents when there are like people of color commit them, right? So like Black and brown bodies committing violence on Asian, the media tends to focus on that and highlights these tensions within these different communities, right? So it's similar to the way that, you know, when you look at what happened with the LA riots and how the media also frame it as like a Black versus Korean, a Korean American issue, instead of the core issue was like poverty, right? The core issue was police brutality and how 4 white officers were acquitted after beating Ronnie King, right? But the media didn't focus on that during the riot. They framed this issue as Korean versus Black. So all these things I think are very important to kind of think about. Again, I think that having the data and tracking what's happening, it's very important to see the trends and to see and to be able to put a number to these stories that are happening. And I think the last thing I'll talk about is that, you know, with the 2 shootings, the Atlanta spa shootings, March 16, and then the one that didn't get a lot of attention was like the FedEx Indianapolis shooting, right? Where 4 of the victims were Asian Indian. It got very little media coverage at the time. And then like locally here, although I think the mainstream doesn't really know or remember this incident that happened in Stockton, where back in 1989 there was the Cleveland Elementary School shooting, right? Some of you may know this, where a supposedly mentally ill white man decided to go to Cleveland Elementary, and he started shooting his gun into the school. He ends up killing 5 school children who were Southeast Asian refugee, and also wounded 32 other people, right? And so like you know, these recent shootings brings these memories back to the community, like, because although the mainstream doesn't talk about it or may not remember it, like this community, these scars are still fresh in terms of what happened to the school. And unfortunately, you know, after he did this, he turned a gun on himself. And so now, like, you know, nearly 30 years later, these families are still looking for justice in this case because of what happened, right? And so again, like, hopefully you see some of the connections I talked about in terms of you know, racial violence and against Asian American. It's not new, right? It happens in waves, and it has affected you know, Asian Americans for the last 200 years, being racialized as foreigners or as non-citizens, and a lot of our laws and policies have reflected that. Right? When we think about Asian Americans were the last group to be able to naturalize as citizens. And because in 1943, the Chinese exclusion law was finally repealed by Congress, right? And so in 1944, when Asian immigrants finally earned a right to naturalize, and we were the last group to earn that right in this country. Okay, so I think I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you so much, Sang. Our next speaker is Dr. Winnie Tam Hung. Dr. Hung is a lecturer in Asian American Studies at Sacramento State University, where she teaches Intro to Asian American Studies and Contemporary Issues. She received her PhD in Cultural Studies at UC Davis. Her current research interests include Asian American intersectional feminism, transformative justice, and Asian American activism studies. Dr. Hung is also involved in Elk Grove Edge Coalition, an intersectional and intergenerational women's group that aims to provide policy solutions to protect women who report sexual harassment and discrimination in city agencies and public schools. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Hung.
Thank you, Dr. Nakano. Thank you, Dr. Banyales. Thank you, Sang and Trexie, for sharing these honest stories. And this is really what ethnic studies, this is really what makes ethnic studies special to me, because it is a community. It is, a place where we see ourselves, where we see our stories and our communities reflected. And it's extra special for me because I'm from the East Coast. I grew up in New York. I went to school in Massachusetts, and I didn't encounter ethnic studies at all until graduate school when I moved to California. And so for me, it's still very, very new. It's still very kind of exciting. And it's almost mind-boggling to have this formal academic space in universities for us to share these kinds of stories and have these conversations. So I'm so grateful to the Ethnic Studies program and the Warrior Cross-Cultural Center for organizing us and holding this space for our grief, our frustrations, and our healing. So let me share my screen. Oh, also, sorry, sometimes when I share screen before I drop a link, it won't let me. So what I did was I put together a Google slide, and what I'd like you to do, please, is click on over to join me in the Google Docs and meet me over here. Do y'all see what I'm seeing? Remembrance and radical imaginations? Thumbs up. Cool. Okay. So today marks the 49th day since a white supremacist misogynist killed 8 people in Atlanta, including 6 Asian American women. Their murders are the direct descendant of the hypersexualization and objectification of Asian women, rooted in American imperialism and empire building in Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. These women were murdered in cold, premeditated blood during the even colder, brighter light of everyday life in America. They were not working class women who happened to be Asian. They were not Asian women who happened to be working class. They went to work one day and never made it home to their families. They too were killed in the line of duty, but their lives won't be celebrated that way. Instead, those of us still living must continue to endure their dehumanization, first as workers, then mistakenly as sex workers, as immigrants, as women who are in the wrong place at the wrong time. And anytime violence happens to women's bodies, it is our fault. We are in the wrong place at the wrong time, or we're wearing the wrong thing, right? As an Asian American woman, it's not my job to account for white supremacist misogyny. I can't tell you why a white man in Georgia could freely purchase a gun the day before he targeted 6 Asian women in 3 Asian businesses. I can't tell you why the same white man gets humanized as a good guy who had a bad day, while people of color are killed by the police for having a mental health crisis, for being unhoused, or driving, walking, sleeping while Black. It is the job of white supremacist misogynistic institutions to clean up the mess of white supremacist misogyny, right? And in naming white supremacy, I think it is only fair because if we call it only anti-Asian racism, we neglect the root cause of anti-Asian racism. We neglect the root cause of racism, which is truly white supremacy, right? I included here just a little bit of intro about myself. If you know nothing else about me, it is that I have 2 children and that I'm from New York and that I'm originally from Chinatown. So all of these statistics, every time I hear yet another elder being attacked, yet another woman spat on, yet another child being called coronavirus, these are all things that really hit home, right? And when I think about anti-Asian violence, when I think about white supremacy, when I think about ethnic studies, I think about how do I talk to my kids about this violence, right? In a way that decenters the trauma of racial and gender and state violence, and in a way that recenters API agency, activism, community, right? Because I don't want us to always be centered on pain and grief, right? Because there's so much and that is debilitating, right? How do we talk about these violences? How do we talk about these causes of violence in a way that centers our agency, our joy, our hope, our resilience, our communities, our strength? So what I decided to do was I created this virtual community altar space. And I added some of the names. I won't say them out loud because I don't have permission from these families, right? But I wanted to use our time today to kind of mark their journey, to mark their passing. So that's why I wanted y'all to have the link to the Google Doc, because if it's available to you, if you feel free, please add the names and initials of folks you want to honor during our time today in this community altar space. Today marks the 49th day since the March 16th shooting in Atlanta. This number is significant to me because in Buddhist traditions, 49 days is the total mourning period, with prayers conducted every 7 days for 7 weeks. The cycle of rebirth is believed to take place within 49 days after death, so prayers are chanted to facilitate the soul's journey through the afterlife. And I want to take this opportunity to collectively honor the friends, aunties, and uncles who were taken from us by anti-Asian racism, by white supremacy, by gender-based violence, and by state violence. Please feel free to join me by adding any names or initials for privacy of ancestors and people you want to honor and remember to this virtual altar. And let's dedicate our time together today as a prayer for their journeys. So I'm going to move on in my slideshow, but please feel free to add names if it feels, if it feels right. I wanted to start with a bit of a self-reflection because the dominant media narratives about anti-Asian violence, about white supremacy, don't mention white supremacy at all. And the narratives about anti-Asian violence since the beginning of this pandemic have been completely ahistorical, largely ignoring the long history of anti-Asian, anti-immigrant, anti-poor, anti-women rhetoric that's foundational to this country. The same dominant media narratives about the shootings in Atlanta continue to harm these communities by centering the perspective of the killer and filtering the narrative through his hatred of Asian women and his hatred of sex workers. So the communities, when I think about anti-Asian violence, I think about intersecting systems of oppression that include white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, and heterosexism. These systems weave stories that are perpetuated through the media and other institutions that we internalize, right? And that makes it harder for the communities that are harmed to get information, support, and the context that's necessary for their grieving, their organizing, and protection of survivors, victims, and the wider community. So to combat this, we have to come up with our own narratives that are true to our experiences in order to honor and heal our communities when violence occurs. One way I do this is by reminding myself to sit with my feelings and asking myself, who or what am I here for? What does my anger protect me from? What will I release if I let myself feel that rage completely? It's been healing for me to recognize my rage and frustration as valid, as part of my own decolonization process. I'm unlearning the racial and sexual gaslighting that occurs when harm comes to the bodies of API women. No, I didn't imagine hearing "me love you long time" when I was walking down the street. No, I didn't imagine seeing someone pull their eyes up by the corners to mimic my so-called almond-shaped eyes on that Zoom call. No, I'm not being overly cautious when I tell my 70-year-old parents to watch their backs when they go out for their daily walks. And no, I didn't imagine someone calling my kid coronavirus on the playground. My rage is valid. My rage shows me what I can no longer tolerate. My rage shows me what I will fight for. I'm here from my apo, my grandma, who I call the notorious Wu Xing Yan, who taught me how to shapeshift because she recognized that surviving in this American society means that you have to blind yourself to certain things, means that you have to pretend not to hear certain things, means that you have to speak a certain way, right? Means that as a woman, you hold a small smile on your face to avoid being accused of having resting bitch face. And I'm here for my children, who I will not teach to shapeshift because I want them to know their history and have pride in their community. Again, that's why I think ethnic studies is so precious, right? What will your rage teach you? When I think about social justice, I try to imagine the world I want to see for API women, trans, and gender nonconforming folks. What is the world we're going to live in after this one? After we tear down the storm? And here I want to amplify the demands of two API activist organizations, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum and Red Canary Song. Their list of demands is a constant reminder for me and is my inspiration blueprint for helping to build the world that I want to see. This is from their community rally against racial and misogynistic violence. They called it Our Sister's Safety. We demand the voices of Asian women and femmes, particularly poor and working class women and femmes, and survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, be centered in the narrative and solutions to racial violence, gender-based violence, and state violence. Destigmatize and decriminalize Asian women and femmes and the work we do to survive. Labor protections, livable wages, and equal pay for working women and femmes. Culturally competent, accessible, and intersectional support for survivors of violence. Abolition of the entire policing, carceral, and counterterrorism system that is fundamentally anti-Black, xenophobic, misogynistic, transphobic, ableist, and imperialist, and continues to harm and kill us. Abolish the police, abolish ICE. Lastly, an end to US imperialism and militarism in Asia and the Pacific. The violence and dehumanization at home mirror the war crimes abroad due to US occupation, aggression, and warmongering throughout Asia and the Pacific. With these demands in mind, I want to share with you some of the guiding stars in my own activist journey. Grace Lee Boggs, philosopher, revolutionary, whose question about the time on the clock of the world helps me think about what is possible and what is needed. Pleasure activist Adrienne Marie Brown, who writes, quote, "Losing our imagination is a symptom of trauma," end quote. She reminds me that social justice work is a type of science fiction because we have to actively imagine the social changes we want to see in order to build the alternative futures we want to live in. Sister Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, queer Black feminist revolutionary, visionary, challenges us to learn from our marine mammal relatives who evolved cooperative forms of child rearing, who roll deep and travel in intergenerational pods of up to 1,000 dolphins, who know instinctively when it's time to play and when it's time to rest. And lastly, Chanel Miller, survivor, writer, and artist, reminds me that storytelling is a revolutionary act that requires practice. I first tell my story to myself as a way to practice using my voice. And I've listed these sources in the speaker notes of the slides if anybody wants to look at them further. I want to end by talking and sharing with you a few of the hopes that I have for us, for our future, right? I hope we center our joy in our activism because we need regeneration, we need healing. I hope that we experience the satisfaction of rolling deep with 1,000 of us in our communities. I hope that we learn to align our actions and movements with our purpose. And I want to share with you some of the words from Samoan poet, a community leader, writer, provider, healer, Teresa Siagatonu. I want you to think about maybe how to finish this sentence that she offers us. We knew we made it to the world we deserve when. And what kind of ancestor are you training to be? How can we support each other? For me, I'll know we've made it to the world we deserve when our communities are resourced and the root causes of harm, including white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, and imperialism, are ripped out. I'll know we made it to the world we deserve when BIPOC folks have access to culturally sensitive and relevant mental health care. I'll know we've made it when all people have access to affordable and safe housing. I'll know we've made it when survivors of harm can feel supported and safe. And I'll know we've made it and when our communities are safe. For me, safety is having the trust to know that I have people who will answer the door when I knock for help. There are alternative versions of community safety that are possible outside of state violence, outside of the carceral system, outside of the prison system, and outside of the police. We need to find those ways. We need to pod up. We need to squad up. We need to roll deep and listen deeply to each other so that we can build these strong communities to survive this state violence, to survive this gender violence. Yes, please. Thank you, Carolina. We invite you to participate in the chat. We know, when will you know we've made it to the world that we deserve? What kind of ancestor are you training to be? For me, I'm training to be someone who works in solidarity, to continue the work of activists and educators who are part of the Third World Liberation Front. I'm training to be the kind of ancestor who listens deeply, someone who is accountable when I cause harm. And lastly, I'm training to be someone who loved her community through action and movement by bringing ethnic studies to the K-12 level here in Elk Grove and having this conversation with my children, my neighbors, my friends, my family members who express racist notions. I'll know I want to be the ancestor who confronts anti-Blackness in my family during Thanksgiving. I want to be that kind of ancestor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hung, for those powerful words and strong reminders on sort of the path forward in these sort of moments that difficult times, right, that we find ourselves in currently. Our last speaker, if I could get back to my bio document here. Our last speaker is Reverend Dr. Trinity Ordona. Dr. Ordona is a recognized revolutionary political activist, community organizer, college teacher, and spiritual advisor. In the 5-decade span of her activist life, Trinity has been a co-founder, board member, and leader of numerous local, national, and international initiatives and organizations that serve LGBTQ+ API communities. Dr. Ordona's scholarship includes several publications, and she has received fellowships and awards for her work, including the Phoenix Award for Outstanding Community Service in 2008, and Curb magazine named her among the, quote, 20 most influential lesbian professors in the United States, also in 2008. Retired from college teaching, Trinity is a minister trained in psychic healing arts and specializes in recovery work with survivors of trauma and violence. Please give Dr. Ordona a warm welcome.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and to Samuel for organizing this, for Dana for moderating, and of course the sharing of experiences by Trexie, Sang, and Winnie, all of which I think give very important background to what I have to say. But before I go into that, I want to also say something about the fact that as the national and international news coverage and global politics have focused on the physical violence striking at Asians and Asian Americans in the US, the pandemic has also hit Pacific Islanders in significant and life-threatening ways, but different from Asian people. So let me just take a minute to explain. Chinese, Japanese, and other East Asians seen as part of these communities, of course, we have suffered discrimination and violence in the US from the beginning of our history here. But those looking for a COVID-19 scapegoat, meaning by blaming China and Chinese people for COVID, has pushed our plight into the mainstream for the first time since the pandemic. That's the historical significance. But the acronym AAPI, which now has become very popular in this period, stands for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And this is actually an aggregation of Asian Americans, which represent 6% of the US population, which is itself 30 some groups of people. And then Pacific Islanders, who are less than 1%, but again, are multiple groups of people. And Pacific Islanders have also suffered injustice for decades, but in very different contexts. And the recent spate of violence against Asian Americans actually has little to do with it. So just to highlight it, for example, the most significant causes that Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have been fighting for are, compensation for stolen land, and the consequences to the Hawaiian people and the land, because Queen Liliuokalani was deposed by the US Marines in 1893, and then all of the islands were just taken and annexed. And the other big cause that's significantly different is the actual sickness caused by nuclear testing. The we've all seen the big mushroom, right? But the Bikini Islands is actually part of the Marshall Islands and was a test site for detonation of 23 nuclear weapons between 1946 and 1958. And those tests were on the reef, in the sea, in the air, and underwater, and produced a combined fission yield of 42 million tons of TNT. So people are sick and have been for decades. And are we recognizing that? Are we even knowing what happened? So this is, again, part of the invisibility that Pacific Islanders have, and are very important to get to that. But I say this because what has happened then is, for Pacific Islanders, their response to COVID is much more similar to other economically marginalized people, like Black, Latino, and Native Americans. So if you really look through the data, you'll see that's where they are. And that, again, is a crisis of COVID. But I say this because I wanted just to explain that this topic is important, but our focus today is on the racism against Asians and Asian Americans. But Pacific Islanders are not just there for dressing. And we need to actually come back as a community to actually really get into that. So let me first get into the topic, which is that by introducing myself a little bit, let me see if I can get my slideshow up here. I guess I have to share the screen. And here we go. I hope this works. Okay, there we go. So
We're not seeing the screen yet.
yeah, you're not seeing it? Oh, what do I do?
So share screen at the bottom, and
I
then
did do that.
then choose the presentation on your desktop.
I did do that. Let's try it again. Sorry, guys. Try
And
it
then
again.
make sure you click share.
Okay.
The final step is share.
Oh, I didn't see that.
There you go.
The final step is share over there. There we go.
Perfect.
We got it. Okay. So first of all, I have lots of names and initials, but you can call me Trinity. And I was a child of the 60s. I grew up in the 50s at a time when the Asian population was less than 1% in the country. And but we grew up under the same conditions. We had the same experiences that have been shared, both as recent immigrants and as parents who didn't speak English very well, and we're poor. But what I experienced, though, was being born at a time when there was transformation in the making. And so I will be speaking from that experience, because 50 years later, we've come to another time. So many of the remarks that people have made are based on the hope for transformation. And I want to say, I was there 50 years ago when I had those same hopes, but I have some experience now from having walked that journey. The first thing is that, like many of you, I was brought to tears many times over when I heard incident after incident of the hatred and vitriol against Asian for our perceived otherness. What else could it be? At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw the first onslaughts in the US of this hatred. First as single incidents, and then now it's an open faucet. So as I said before, this is what I grew up under. And now that we have, so really the question is, have we gone, where have we gone? Where are we going to? And today we're now faced with Chinatown businesses being vandalized, as well as our cultural symbols. This was what was a cherry blossom tree in front of the Japanese Community Youth Council. It was basically ripped down to its bare threads. And now cultural religious symbols. Last month, actually in March, 6 Buddhist temples were attacked and vandalized. 15 statues of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas were defaced with black spray. And as you can see, Jesus is actually painted on the back of this statue. But I wanted to also want you to see that it's actually broader. So I'm going to talk a little bit about internationally, because to our neighbor next door upstairs in the north, a March 2021 news article reported that more than 1,100 anti-Asian attacks were reported in Canada. In fact, during the period alone of January 1st to February 28th, 50% of those took place. And unfortunately, anti-Asian hatred is flourishing unchecked in France as well, and actually throughout Europe. To give you a little bit of background, at the end of 2020, an angry hate-filled Twitter call to attack Chinese people went out on the streets of France, and and it was followed by a dozen assaults on Asians and fueled the flames of anti-Asian sentiment. So I'm just going to read you some of the tweets that went down. Hitler should have killed all the Chinese, not the Jews. Put me in a cage with Chinese. I'll have fun with them. I want to watch all their hope fade from their eyes. It's a hunt for Asians, for slant eyes and yellow dog eaters. And You're only good for bringing back diseases. This is a march, however, that took place as a result of that vitriol. And it's actually the first of many taking place throughout Europe, because the generations, the second generation of Asians immigrants are responding differently than what their parents did, which was to be quiet and hope it would go away. And this is important because therefore we're actually seeing the emergence of a multi-generational movement across the globe that's coming together spontaneously. And I bring this up because Europe per se does not have the same history of anti-Asian violence. And yet they're saying all the same things. So what's going on? So to give you an idea, take a look at these pictures. This is in Europe, but it could be in the US, across nations and generations. So though we speak different languages and come from different cultures across, but the shared experiences of Asians in the diaspora strike similar repetitive chords. And this has been said by all the three previous speakers. Feelings of otherness, not being wanted, staring down or being stared at, as if it's normal to be stared at, to be spit at, and basically being gaslit when you dare to call out this anti-Asian violence. And so I want to bring this up because we already know from what's been said before that this is not the first time that Asians have experienced discrimination. And in fact, in the US, Chinese were the only people as a nationality to be completely excluded by law, and still are the only ones to ever have been. And then Japanese as a whole were interned. So yes, maybe what we did in the past was to pretend, like Winnie's grandmother say, pretend, blind yourself, don't see. But it didn't save us from the Exclusion Act. It didn't save us from the internment. And I bring this up because we need to learn the lesson from the past, as opposed to wait and repeat it. And so look at this. I can't stop being Asian, but you can stop being an asshole. Yay! You can see we're kind of getting over the wall that has been kind of shielding us as a community from what needs to be done. And look at this. We're now organizing too. And within that, there is a desire to not simply go inward and unite the community, but rather to go outward and create a more anti-racist solidarity. And this is really the direction that it's going in. And this is important for us to see because the next question is, in which direction and to what end? So this is where being a 70-year-old and is an advantage. I've been an activist and an academic for over 50 of those years. And I always ask those questions myself all the time for 50 years. But having turned towards spiritual and metaphysical dimensions of reality that were always there, but in modernity, we kind of pretend that there is no such thing. I now know that this is not only a challenging moment, but guess what? It can be different from the past. Why? First of all, we know what happened before. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, we had little or no legal standing or political initiative or social support from anybody in the entire country. We only had ourselves. But today we not only have more of us, but we have and continue to call on many allies, friends, and supporters. That is a huge difference. That is a huge difference. And the second thing is that what about all the things that are being done? You know, what should we think about those? You know, should we have just increased representation, or should we make more of an investments in our programs? And what about equitable solutions, all of which have been suggested? I'm saying that all those actions are plausible. Yet the source, which is systemic, institutionalized, and individualized racism, which all of our speakers have addressed, will not change overnight, nor by a singular change in policy or administration. Racism, along with its intersectional relations of sexism, homophobia, ableism, and classism, are intertwined in the founding and maintenance of systemic oppression of inequality throughout the world. Now, this is when you start thinking, oh my God, nothing is going to change. It's too big. What am I going to do? And then you could throw up your hands. But I'm here to say that every step that puts a dent, a mark, or slippage into those systems must be undertaken until it is we, the people, who re-evolve ourselves in the process by opening our hearts and minds. And only then can we co-create the just solutions together. And I say this because every challenge, in fact, life itself, is a cycle of growth and change made up of ups and downs. But I don't mean that every up is good or that every down is bad, because that, in fact, is dualistic thinking, meaning either or, good, bad, black, white. In fact, that's part of a problem. The truth is that we are in a cycle of life like the sun. The sun rises and the sun sets. And then it rises and the sun sets. In other words, it goes on and on and on. And yet every day is unique. And that means that every day is up to us to choose how to act. What choices we make the difference in the days we create and the days that take place. So in the face of a challenge, maybe we hesitate. Maybe we close our eyes. Maybe we run away. We devolve. But once we step up and step into the challenge, we re-evolve. In other words, revolution is really re-evolution. And this is an inherent part of life. This is really how we, as a globe, society, species, every part of life actually moves. And I say this because many would call what I'm saying is the silver lining on the cloud. And I said that's true. There is a silver lining in every cloud, in every trauma, in every challenge, in every day. And if you look at the rise of anti-Asian violence, you also have to see that there's an emerging global movement in response for peace and justice. That's the other side of it. And that's taking place in the face of long-standing ingrained hate and violence. So yes, you can be overwhelmed by the enormity of it. And yet, if you look at the incidents and what we're doing, we are actually responding to it in the face of that enormity. So you can see our own evolution as human beings in our Asian experiences. And the other part of it is that we are not alone. In fact, let me see if I can pull this slide up here. This is a desecration of the mural of the Virgin of Guadalupe. This man hit this mural 18 times with a sledgehammer. This was just this year. The police launched an investigation, but so far no results. And in fact, the incident made headlines because the attack on Catholic statues and images has become actually an alarming trend. This is a beheaded statue in a church in Miami. And the statues of the Virgin Mary were particularly targeted, but there's been others in New York, Massachusetts, Tennessee, and Colorado. So really, in the broadest picture, the attack on Asian temples means that the violence usually targeting Jewish synagogues or Muslim mosques now signals that we are included in the despised others. In other words, we ourselves can no longer keep the blinders on that we are the model minority. This is the best truth, which is to face our own truth. Because until we do, we cannot move forward. And the other thing is, this hatred is not exclusive. In Asia alone, look at the mass repression of pro-democracy, right? In Hong Kong, in Myanmar. And what about the rampant removal of temples and statues in China? We can go through each country, through Asia and the world. So you can see that the anti-Asian violence that's directed to us signals our inclusion and removing the veil that it's all okay, when it never was. It never was. And as Winnie pointed out, we really have to go back to the roots in colonization and imperialism. And why is it that we have this whole setup of a hierarchy in which only the strongest win and everybody else loses? So, but that gets me to the point that there is an alternative. There is a third way. Grace Lee Boggs, a Chinese American revolutionary, said, "The oppressed internalize the values of the oppressor unless they have confronted the values that they have internalized and consciously adopted different values." And this is what we also have to do. Now, some people say that this is like, something far off in the never, never land. And I bring it up because I have been a witness to, in fact, that actual transformation. Because in the Asian community, guess what? You can be queer and be in the community and out now. That was not true. That was not true 30 years ago. And yet the sea change has taken place. Now, how did that happen? Nobody lobbied. Nobody courted the Asians to change their minds, because it was the heart that was changed, the heart that was opened. And so I'm here to say that being API queer and proud was also a process of transformation that I lived through and that we all benefit from. And if we can also see that the pie in the sky is not there, it's not a dream, it's a real possibility. In fact, we are in a period of powerful shifts and transitions globally. That is really why the shift is, the sea change that we're talking about is actually, moving. So let me show you this. This is a slide that shows that, where are we? Come on. That as of 2017, Asian and Pacific Islanders support same-sex marriage at 69%. That's 1 in, 7 out of 10. That is higher than all the other ethnic groups. Look at that. How did that happen? We did it. We ourselves did it. How did we do it? It certainly wasn't the politicians. And we're only 5% of the population, usually overlooked. It was really because we stood up. We showed ourselves to be visible and vocal. And we organized our friends to support us. We came out to our parents and showed them. We organized our parents and we came out in our communities In our Chinese newspapers, our Japanese newspapers, we said the story just like you have. All our previous speakers have all told those stories. It breaks the ice. And in fact, the tragedy of being homophobic in your own family, and this is the story that these family members had to share because they made the mistake of homophobia. So I say all of this to say that there is silver lining in the clouds, and I'm living proof. And so is the existence of queer people that have otherwise been marginalized. And 30, 40 years ago, our movement started with the gay bashing. We also had to fight against all of these things that we're afraid of. So all of these things have helped all of our community members step forward, including for trans people. So, and now Taiwan even has the same, same-sex weddings. So change and transformation is not impossible. In fact, it's very possible. It's all up to us. So we are of one world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ordona, and all of our speakers. Just before we jump into kind of opening this up to question and answers for the speakers, I just kind of wanted to try to piece together some of these things because I think, we've been talking about a lot of different topics, but I think all of them really speak to a couple of really central themes that I also think are really important in this moment as we are thinking about ethnic studies, as the growth of ethnic studies, in the CSU system with the requirement that is going to be put in place in the fall is really timely. And one of the things that kind of was repeated to me throughout the four speakers is the kind of revealing of this diversity, right, within the Asian American community in a lot of different respects, right? So, and in particular, highlighting aspects of the Asian American experience that I think don't get the most attention, right? When we're thinking about, what we see on television with Crazy Rich Asians or, Bling Empire, all of these things, right, that are so kind of prominent right now. And so I really appreciated kind of Trexie and saying, right, sharing their stories and kind of talking about these aspects, right, of the Asian American community, such as, being undocumented, being a refugee, right, which are Asian American experiences just as much as all these other sorts of ideas that surround the model minority, right? And I think that it does resist the model minority mythology, right? And I think that Dr. Hung and Dr. Ordona also, right, in your kind of words about sort of productive rage and kind of looking to the past, right? And it really, to me, speaks to the evolution, right, of Asian American activism and kind of political consciousness, right? That is very different. And I think, Dr. Ordona, particularly, you're speaking to this kind of given your own sort of experiences in history, looking at this. Also speaks to the importance of ethnic studies again, right? Because it's not just about us telling the stories of the diversity of the Asian American experience, but also remembering sort of this history so we can grow from that history, right? As Dr. Hung was saying kind of about, her grandmother kind of teaching her, to be a shapeshifter was a frame of reference, right? For a generation of Asian Americans that may not be true for us anymore, right? Because we live in a different time, because our community, right, has evolved in really important ways. And so I think that that's all really important. And I think that, the other aspect that doesn't actually wasn't discussed as much in this context because of the speakers that we invited. But, the other aspect of the Asian American community that often gets overlooked is the South Asian American community as part of this larger umbrella group. So thinking about people with origins in India and Pakistan and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, et cetera, Nepal, Bhutan, all these places. And I want to just kind of call attention to it right now, specifically because of what's going on in India right now, right? And I think that when we're thinking about kind of the COVID-19 sort of explosion that's happening in India and the death rates that are happening, that we don't necessarily think about them as quote unquote Asian issues or Asian American issues in the way that we have thought about, right? Like anti-Asian hate or kind of the discourse around the China virus and all of these things, but it is also, right, an Asian American issue. These are also, right, points of origin for the Asian American community. And so I just wanted to highlight that as well, because it's something that I think we often lose sight of, right, when we think about Asian and we have a particular image of what Asian means, and oftentimes that doesn't include people of South Asian descent. So I'll leave it there. Those are just some of the things that I thought about as folks were speaking. I believe I'm going to throw it over to Carolina at this point, who has a little bit of an announcement. I do see in the chat someone asked about the ethnic studies requirement, and we can come back to that in a little bit.
I'll make it super short. I just wanted to let you all know that we're going to be entering your names into a raffle. And if you hang on till the end, we will be raffling off Helen Zia's Asian American Dreams book. We'll have 2 copies that we'll raffle off. So I just wanted to make that announcement. If you are not interested in the book, you can just put your little comment in the chat and we'll just remove you from the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Kato. I wanted to open this up to just questions from everybody, anybody who wants to throw it in. So feel free if you would like. I'm trying to think about the best way for us to kind of keep this sort of organized. How familiar are people with using hand raising?
That's in the reactions, yeah.
Or a question mark in the chat.
Or a question mark in the chat. Yeah, so what we'll do is if you have questions, you can go ahead and throw a question mark in the chat, and then you can speak your question by taking yourself off mute at that point. If you would like to as well, you can just type your question straight into the chat, and we can take the questions that way as well. If you know how to use the hand raising, I will also pay attention to that. So you have all sorts of options, but please feel free to engage with our speakers and kind of draw from their wealth of experience. What we'll also do, just for the sake of kind of keeping things organized, is I'll try to take a few questions at a time and then let all of the speakers sort of reflect on those questions sort of in groups, if that's okay. So ask away.
Oh, there's a hand up.
I just want to say thank you so much. Truly appreciate this knowledge and wisdom and experiences. It's so eye-opening and motivating to me to put this on my agenda as something, that needs to be more learned about and acknowledged by society. I just have, I grabbed some notes, but I just have so many information and questions. I'm sorry if I'm talking fast or a little nervous, but I know that in one of my social justice class, we are learning about how decolonizing education is truly important, and part of that process includes ethnic courses. And what I was taking from a few of the speakers was, first, I didn't even know that there was, the difference between Pacific Islanders and Asians. So I think that was like really eye-opening, and that needs to be truly mentioned. I mean, where is this being offered? So because I have it because of social justice, but like, how can people, have these ethnic courses when they're not being like a priority? They're not, are they going, I know there was a big debate about having them in elementary. Is it too much, is it too much information to have representation? I don't think so, but why do you think, or I don't know, I'm just, if anyone wants to like, why we think so many people are opposed of decolonizing education, one of them being racism, I know. Any other like comments we can talk about that? I don't know if I'm blabbering now, but I just have so much to say and I just don't know where to begin, so I'm sorry about that.
No, thank you so much, Vanessa, for the question and the comment. Very appreciated. If any of the speakers want to speak on that as we're kind of collecting other questions over here, please feel free to chime in. Yeah, go ahead, Trinity.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we should take denial is one of the biggest problems that we have, because only with denial could we be so terrible.
Mhm.
Only if you keep your eyes closed and don't believe it hurts could you hurt somebody like that. And therefore, not knowing the truth keeps this country in ignorance.
Right.
And that's been going on for 400 years. So the example from Arizona, where they actually outlawed the ethnic studies classes, is an indication of how important the struggle is for education and how vicious it's going to be.
And how
But it's important to begin.
To add to that, because education ties in with politics a little bit, and I remember Sen Bang was talking about how there was like this political Reddit that came about so abruptly in the last months. And so politically, I know that as educators, it's kind of hard to leave that imprint, leave that little dent. We could be activists, but or like, I know it's a bigger issue. Like, I even think, are cops letting anti-Asian hate crimes happen? Like, is it because I even did a research of how, prosecution doesn't even want to pick these hate crimes because it's hard to say that they specifically hate that person. They have to specifically say, I did it because I hate them, and there's not like funding or a priority on this. And it's just like a huge issue that I feel like should be addressed and somehow changed in politics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Vanessa, I will also share that, in tandem to the ethnic studies requirement that is now mandated at the CSU, there are also similar bills kind of traveling through the legislature at various kind of stages for ethnic studies requirements at the high school level as well as at the community college. So, these are things that are also happening at other levels. It's not just happening at the 4-year at the CSU system. And there are also localities, right, that have already mandated. So Berkeley, California, right, their high schools have a mandated ethnic studies classes. There's also, I believe, at Los Angeles, and kind of communities down there that have done similar things. So, it is happening and people are getting exposed, but you're absolutely right as well that why does it take us to have a mandated course? Why do we not just have this representation, right, part of the broader curriculum in the first place, right? When we learn about US history, why do we not learn about kind of the full context, right, of American history?
They don't want to know.
Any other questions?
Or comments too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, we can go to the raffle at this point since we're getting close to closing. Carolina, do you have the wheel?
Yes, let's give our panelists some love in the meantime. Give us a little emoji reaction or put it in the chat. Let's give them all a warm stand state, love and virtual hug. We're just very excited that, we were able to be part of this, and such a gift to have all of them here sharing their knowledge and their wisdom. Andrea has the spin ready to go. So let's do 2 spins and choose 2 winners. Ready, begin.
All right.
I've never done this before, so we're
Okay, so Dr. Banales.
oh, you don't count, Dr. Pañales.
I will. I got the confetti. I got the confetti though. That's important.
Yeah, let's spin again.
Yeah, buy your
Okay.
own book.
Oh my gosh.
And oh, here goes another one.
Oh, it's so close. Oh, okay, Peggy.
Okay.
Are you here, Peggy?
I am, thank you.
Yay! If we'll put it in the chat afterwards, but we'll give you instruction on how we can get your address. So
Yeah, just
yeah,
if you could
congrats.
email us, that would be great at wccc@csustan.edu. I'm putting that in the chat and we'll get the information from you.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, here we go. One more.
Hi, baby.
And we have Christian Montanez. Are you here, Christian?
Going once, going twice. All right, no Christian. We're gonna go ahead and go one more time.
Okay. Let's see. Is it Irene? Irene Gutierrez? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yay! Congrats. Same thing. Please email us at wccc@csustan.edu. Your mailing address, please, and your full name, so that way we can get this book to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And in closing, on behalf of the Warrior Cross Cultural Center, the team, also a little shout out to Jennifer and to Jocelyn from ASI, who helped promote this event to the Stan State community and all the warriors. We thank you for that support. We are very grateful for this space tonight, and so thank you so much. I put in the chat, we are having a Cinco de Mayo event tomorrow.
Oh,
This
good.
is going to be in regards to a critical thinking perspectives again, and this is really going to take a take on COVID-19 in Mexico. So we invite you to participate and join us. There's a link in the chat there for you to register and be able to join us tomorrow. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. I'll pass it back to Dr. Nakano or Dr. Bañales.
Sure. So just reminding you, there's a series of different events. I'm going to put the calendar for the Warrior Cross Cultural Center and also for the Ethnic Studies program. We have a film festival, Race and Power, that's free, and it's starting May 10th. And you can see a variety of different films that deal with this topic, these critical topics that you'd often don't see in Hollywood or even in the mainstream. So I invite you to look at that program and, spread the word. So thank you everybody again, to the panelists for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us. And I think this is part of the transformation, right? And also to Dr. Nakano for being with us here, and Carolina and everybody else who's part of this event. So thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful night, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions. You could look us up in the website.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whoa.